pharmaceutical companies are some of the largest investors in major network media, network news, to the tunes of billions of dollars in investment every single year.
Shawn Stevenson, what up?
What's up, man?
I always love hanging with you.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
I don't feel like I get to see you enough.
And we live in the same city now.
I know. Where did you move from again?
St. Louis.
St. Louis, that's right.
Yeah, Midwest.
The Midwest.
Yeah.
You like in LA?
I mean,
It's a weird time.
It's a weird, to say the least, but here in LA, but it's also contrary to popular belief. We've also had such a high rate of compliance of things, but yet things are in many ways the worst here, And so something's just not adding up. And, this is one of the things I really love about you is that we're just really coming from a place of logic and looking at what actually works. And also, oftentimes if we look at the results of how things unfold, whether it's just general health stuff, the way that things have been unfolding has not been successful. Like we are literally the sickest nation in the history of humanity, right? And people, like, it's kind of hard for us to really get that. And I'm talking about from specifically self-inflicted chronic diseases. Prior to the pandemic, we had about 242 million US citizens were overweight or obese. That number is going, I'm pretty sure we're knocking on the door of 250 million, which is insane to even be able to say that. About 130 million US citizens diabetic or pre-diabetic, 115 million Americans regularly sleep deprived. 60% of our citizens have some degree of heart disease already. And it was recently published, and I think you might have saw this one as well, finding that only 12% of US citizens are metabolically healthy.
Yikes.
It's insane. And it's just like, we're operating in a system that creates that type of outcome. Something is wrong. But the beautiful part is, especially today, platforms like this, we can discuss these things and we can actually do something about it. So it's pretty exciting.
It is. And that's why I'm so glad to have you here, because you've actually become a source for people in terms of really credible research that's coming out that seems to be kept behind closed doors. And you would think that we live in a time of a plurality of ideas and voices and the democratization of ideas and science. And yet we can't, for some reason, there seems to be corporate interest, the politicization of knowledge, which to me is like one of the greatest tragedies to have emerged from this whole debacle. And so I really appreciate the stuff that you put out, offering an alternate viewpoint and a very credible viewpoint at that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That means a lot. And, it's so interesting. Even as you're saying that, I'm like, it's 2021.
Yeah.
We think we're so evolved, and yet we're participating in the censorship of science, the censorship of voices under the guise of it being, this disinformation or misinformation, when in reality, the foundation of the United States, that number one tenet is freedom of speech. And so with that being the tenet, in science, it should be even more so. It should be even more demanded, because literally the very foundation of the science that we have today, every single month, week, year, something that we believe to be true has been annihilated. And most often it's been against great opposition of those things, but people still have the right to say them. Really pioneering scientists have come along and just taken a lot of arrows just to change the belief, because, one of the foundational reasons that I've come to accept is that, when you base your life around certain things, base your reality around certain beliefs, and then you find out that that thing isn't accurate, we will fight very, very, very hard and adamantly to keep that reality. And it really is because of human psychology. Our number one driving force as a human being is to stay congruent with the ideas we carry about ourselves and about the world. Like, everything about us is, even the thoughts we think thoughts that are in alignment with who we believe ourselves to be, how we believe the world to be. So when kind of the foundation or the rug gets pulled from under you, like, it can really, really throw your life into a tizzy. And I'm grateful that I went through an example of that very young. So I got to kind of recalibrate, and having one view about our medical paradigm, and just like getting face to face with, wait, this isn't working very well. Like, and also dealing with my own health issues and being told that I had this incurable arthritic spinal condition when I was just a kid. I was 20. But even having that diagnosis, it was years in the making. And to be told that this is incurable, there's nothing you can do about this. And my physician, I asked him, does this have anything to do with what I'm eating? Should I change my, my diet, exercising? And he looked at me like I was from another planet. And he
Wow.
said, I'm sorry, son, this is something that just happens. I'm sorry it happened to you. This has nothing to do with what you're eating. Then he gave me a prescription to eat some drugs. Like, what? Doesn't matter what you're putting in your mouth, but go ahead and put these in your mouth. And it took me a couple of years to have that, like the break, because I had definitely a strong cognitive bias because I came up in the system. I even went to school pre-med because I was like, this is a way to help people and, whatever the case might be. But I hated science. Fortunately, I hated science at the time.
Hmm.
But that's just the nature of reality too, is kind of bringing me back with a reinvigorated passion for it because the reason I didn't like science was it didn't seem like it connected to my life. It didn't have a visceral connection. And now that my health was on the line, it sparked an interest. And I started to realize as I'm in my college biology class, like, oh, I know what she's trying to say, where everybody's just kind of, their eyes are glazed over. And I remember my biology teacher in college, like, she cried on the last day because she was so passionate about her work and she was really hoping the students got it.
Hmm.
And I got it. I got it. And I could see the rest of the class pretty much didn't get it, because everything seemed kind of abstract. And everybody's just like, this is part of the system for me to go through, for me to get to fill in the blank. But now, as she was talking about, the mitochondria, like, I get it. Like, I really had that connective tissue. So, but long story short, with even that system or that break, that cognitive bias being broken, it created an opportunity. And this is the point I want to make is that whenever we have a shift in our thinking or what we believe to be true, and we find out that it's not accurate, we get to fill that space with something.
Hmm.
But I want to implore people to do it more consciously and intentionally because the world that we live in, something is going to fill that space. Somebody, we think we're the driver of our own, mental car in a sense, but we can like get an Uber with our thinking, you know what I mean? And it might be, you kind of have like an agreed upon destination. Maybe it's like a model or a mentor if we're Ubering out our intentionality or our thought process. But sometimes it can be like a kidnapping situation,
Hmm.
where you're outsourcing where you're going to somebody else that you didn't even plan on. So just today more than ever, be intentional about who you spend time with, not just physically, but the messages that you're taking in, because there are a lot of vested interests in you essentially being a consumer of things that you don't need. For example, a lot of people don't realize this, but um, pharmaceutical companies are some of the largest investors in major network media, network news, to the tunes of billions of dollars in investment every single year. They're paying their bills. Do you think they're going to spend a lot of time talking about Johnson and Johnson's $26 billion settlement for their contribution to the opioid epidemic?
Hmm.
That story is going to be here today, gone today. They might throw it up on the blog for like a minute, but you're not going to hear anything else about it if they talk about it at all, you know? And so keeping that in mind and also the financial interests. And I went and dug around. Actually, Harvard did a report on this because they were trying to have more transparency in media in the news. And they did this report and they found that the same financial organization, Vanguard Group, right? So this massive, massive multi-billion dollars in assets, I think even like $1 trillion, but they're the number one investor in, I don't care, literally, this is what Fox, MSM, CNN, ABC News, they all have in common. Vanguard Group is the number one investor in all of them. So you might think that, hey, there's different perspectives going on, but they're all doing the same thing to make their investors happy, right? So this is why you won't often see a narrative disrupting idea on your particular news channel. It's all going to fit into that cookie cutter universe that is also kind of geared towards you hating other people, and thinking that the quote other side is stupid,
Hmm.
and it's going back and forth. So it's just a lot of illogical happenings going place. But funny enough, there's so many people who are very intelligent, but that intelligence can come with a bit of a double-edged sword in a sense, because I think that a lot of people today, they're using their intelligence to just make themselves believe more of what they already want to believe. So the last thing I want to share in that is, and I just want to throw this out there for everybody. If you could do one thing today, practice, and this is going to sound crazy, practice the art of being wrong.
Hmm.
So a lot of the reason why the things that I've created and put out this past year and a half, or just, I've been in this field for 20 years, but in particular, and making such, I mean, dude, it's insane. The people that have been impacted, freaking governments, different states, mayors, all this different stuff has been reaching out, using my work, going to these different boards and things like that.
I love that.
But what I'm doing is as I'm seeing the data, I'm aware of my own cognitive bias, which I have a tendency towards what does our genes expect? Like, what does our DNA expect for healthy function? What does our immune system require in order to function at a optimal level? I understand that, but I'm open to new things coming along that can help with that. And so, but knowing that, as I'm seeing the data, I also ask, okay, what is how could I possibly be wrong here? What is this particular article, what is this particular study saying that I might not agree with, that has some credibility, and really sitting with it? I think a lot of people today, we're grabbing headlines, we're grabbing a little piece of the abstract that fits our narrative, instead of like, we're inundated with information, but we're starving for real knowledge and wisdom.
Hmm.
And I think a part of that is just sitting with something. Just, we get a new report, actually sit with it, think about it, process it, look at it from different dynamics, and also invite yourself to be wrong, and look at it from the perspective of something that might be totally opposite. And the funny thing is, when you practice being wrong, you're going to be right a whole hell of a lot more.
Hmm. I love that, dude. It makes so much sense. And I love what you were saying about how we will basically create meaning where there isn't necessarily any to satisfy our own bias for confirmation.
Mm.
It's because humans are, we're such elegant pattern seekers. I mean, I think that's part of what defines the human species, right? But we'll also, I think, attempt to create a pattern where there was none to begin with, just because it feels good, because you get that dopamine hit when something confirms your previously held beliefs. And I think that's one of the major problems now, is that people aren't looking for information that flows counter to their preconceived notions about a given topic. I do the same thing when I'm reading a study. Say I'm reading about, I don't know, a new compound and its relation to brain function or something. Before I even begin reading that study, I know that that what I want to see is success, right? So if the study then ends up showing something, like a positive result, that's when I go back and I read it, and I'm like trying to pick the holes in the argument to challenge my own biases and my own assumptions and my own, yeah, it's all about bias.
Yeah.
And the way that you're suggesting people think, I think it's so important, because people have this idea that science is something that you have to have a PhD after your name or an MD to practice. When in reality, science is a method. And I think that anybody can adopt these ideas, and everybody should adopt these ideas, especially today. So I'm just so glad that you're saying, what is it you're saying?
You're talking about this phenomenon. It really can be under the umbrella of expertism, right? So more than ever, people have been outsourcing their beliefs or what is going to be optimal for them to somebody that they deem to be an expert, instead of, quote, doing their own research. And in fact, there's been some pretty popular articles saying, when it comes to science, don't do your own research. It's one of the popular articles that was getting passed around. But here's the thing, and I'm definitely pro getting coaching and getting some input from people who have a degree of expertise. But the flaw in that system is, we automatically are assuming that the expert has a successful track record, or a significant understanding of the subject matter. And now, with that said, so you and I both, we have friends who are, very prestigious, MDs and, scientists in their respective fields. And many of them, the ones that are really good at an incredible level, who are really helping people, they had a shift in their paradigm that actually started to point them towards health because their entire education was not about health. It was a focus on disease. And so if, for example, somebody's like, well, I'm going to listen to my sister-in-law's husband or whatever, my aunt's, third cousin who's an immunologist. Now, what does that actually mean? They're probably brilliant. Now, the thing is, I would implore them to ask them a question. Ask them, what is the immune system made of? And just ask them that question. And they're probably going to be like, what are you talking about? Like that's such a strange question. But a really important reality for them to kind of bring to the forefront is that their immune cells are literally made from food. It's made from water. It's made from the air that they're breathing. These are the foundational pieces that make up the immune cells themselves. If they don't understand that, they literally don't even understand what they're dealing with. Like, and this is the flaw in our system is that, one of my friends that I'm thinking about, he's a award-winning gastroenterologist and he went to school for 12 years, but he's successful now because he broke from his conventional education, which he literally deals with the organs that are related to the digestion, assimilation, and elimination of food. That's his focus. And yet in school, he learned about food for like 2 weeks.
Wow.
It's insane. And what he learned was the fringe things like, if your patient has a rare B12 deficiency, do this, like nothing really viable and not understanding the gastrointestinal tract itself is made from food, right? Their stomach lining is made from food. Their liver is made from food. And so, but once he got that piece dialed in, he became radically successful because he understood that this is based on a foundational tenet here of what you're putting into your mouth, you're making your tissues out of, right? So this belief about expertism, and somebody being an expert in the subject, I would implore you to think about what is their track record? What is their success rate with their patients? If they're a cardiologist, I know some of the top cardiologists, some of them have TV shows, all right? And they've had that break as well to make them more successful. It doesn't mean that they don't still subscribe to a lot of their dogma. But to a significant degree, they realize like, okay, the heart is made from food. The blood cells, the red blood cells, the capillaries, the endothelium, it's all made from food. Even there's some fat with the heart as well. You have your epicardial fat as well. So what kind of fats is the heart actually engaging with? And so starting to think about these things and now employing with the patients, okay, these are things that are quote heart healthy, but are based in reality, not based on marketing, right? Because some of the things that are quote heart healthy have literally nothing to do with the heart at all. Like your heart is trying to repel those things, but the human body, we're so resilient, like it'll do the best it can with whatever you give it. In a sense, part of the infliction of mass disease that we have is just the human body being resilient and trying to figure out different ways to operate when given such low quality materials, and so that's what I would implore people to do is just to look at somebody's actual track record. If they are a cardiologist, and not to say that again, they can't be of great, some of these folks are like, I'm always open. I'm a eternal student. But I'll tell you, in my clinical practice, a lot of the people that I worked with were nurses, were doctors. They were coming to see me to try to get their stuff together. And because of that, I've had the great opportunity, like I just did a guest lecture for the neuroscience department at NYU. I'm the guy I'm working. We've got something in the mix right now with Harvard for some physician training.
Wow.
So this might help to change this paradigm. But I'm doing the talks at Google, all the things, but it all came from just paying attention to the basics. Like what are the results? So last thing I'm gonna say with this is, so somebody's coming in and they have hypertension, right? Instead of looking at what is the cause of the hypertension, which could be a myriad of things, some of the most logical, most likely are sleep deprivation, dehydration, nutrient deficiency, bringing in things, toxicants that are damaging circulation. These are some basic tenets. Sedentary behavior. Instead, here's lisinopril. I see you got hypertension, you got high blood pressure. We're going to give you this. There's no talk of, and matter of fact, 9 times out of 10, they're not even asking about those things, those lifestyle factors that are causing. And it's not because they're not good people. It's because it's how the system is created in such a way that it's about pharmacology first and foremost. And even if they wanted to ask about their stress in their relationship, they don't have time
Mm.
because the system puts them in a position where they're working on quantity and not quality, right? So it's just like you got a 15-minute visit, maybe 15 minutes, oftentimes 5 or 10 minutes with the doctor, and they've got a deal. They're trying to get their bills paid, and they are trying to save lives in the belief system that they have. But again, it's very flawed. And the thing is, at the end of the day, here's the thing. Look at the results. I'm not just making this up. Our medical system sucks at chronic disease. It's phenomenal for acute situations.
Mm.
Emergency medicine, don't give me a curcumin, if like my arm's hanging off, but if we look at the things that is actually killing us, heart disease by far, I don't think a lot of people saw this in 2020. We were so focused on COVID, a lot of folks didn't realize with heart disease, we went from about 630,000 deaths per year to almost 700,000 in 2020.
Wow.
Right? So it took this jump, and it's just like, it's not even second or third page news. Like nobody's heard about it. Like, why did we have this massive uptick in heart disease deaths? Sans COVID, like without that being a factor. And it's because our society has gotten radically, even prior to the pandemic, we're now worse
Mm.
than we were going into it. More sleep deprivation, more diabetes, more obesity, because, and this is what I did at the very beginning. What I did was I was looking at sales for processed food companies. I was looking at their profits. And there was one of these big food companies that was actually filing for bankruptcy, and COVID saved them. All right, it came along, and their profits just shot right up. The consumption of processed food skyrocketed. Obviously, sedentary behavior skyrocketed. But I think you probably saw the study, but this was published in the BMJ, and it was it's under the umbrella. You've got the British Journal of Sports Medicine,
Mm.
and they tracked the exercise behavior of folks prior to contracting COVID-19 to see what their outcomes were. And so one of the studies that was done here in California is about 50,000 folks. They found that folks who regularly exercise and versus folks who were more sedentary, the folks who were sedentary had about 2.5 times more likelihood of contracting COVID-19,
Mm.
which is pretty significant. But another study that was just done, this was done with folks in South Korea. And, this is another little contrary to popular belief. A lot of other countries are consolidating and tracking data way better than the US is.
Mm.
And so they do a lot more as far as tracking people's health and their habits as far as their patients. And they also looked at strength training versus aerobic exercise. And they found that folks who strength train had a significant decrease in their infection rate,
Wow.
in their in severity of symptoms, but aerobic exercise actually outperformed as far as reduction in infection rate, severe symptoms, and significant reduction in death.
Mm.
But both combined, people who regularly engaged in some aerobic exercise and some strength training, it was like twice as effective
Wow.
in protecting against infections and severity of symptoms. And one of the cohorts even found 83% reduction in death from COVID-19 for folks who regularly exercise. You would think at this point, again, it would be something that's widely recommended. But at the beginning of this, people were on some, we can't get people healthier overnight. Just focus on mitigation, that's cool. We can have these superficial mitigation tactics, but at some point you've got to live in the real world. And now we're making people less healthy. And so now we're dealing with the fallout from that. And that's a big reason people are seeing stuff is like, it's not getting better right now. It's because we're not addressing the real underlying issue, which is our susceptibility.
I mean, we've been in this pandemic for 18 months now, 18, 19 months. Where is the call to action from our governing bodies, our politicians, the mainstream media to step on the gas when it comes to, lifestyle and proper nutrition? Now, I just want to be clear in that I definitely think that there's value in the vaccine. So I don't want people to think that I'm placing diet and lifestyle over vaccine when it comes to the immediate time frame, right? Like lifestyle change is difficult. It takes a long time, but we're talking about 18 to 19 months of runway that people have had, and there hasn't been so much as a whisper. And of course, age is still the number one risk factor when it comes to COVID severity, and age is not modifiable, but your body composition is. Obesity is a modifiable risk factor. Type 2 diabetes is a modifiable risk factor. So it makes me so angry that that nobody's saying eat better food, tend to your sleep, get more exercise. Not even so much as a whisper.
Listen, so this was published in the American Journal of Infection Control. The study is titled "Lack of Sleep Can Jeopardize Vaccine Effectiveness." What the researchers uncovered was that folks who were sleeping less than 6 hours a night, which is not uncommon in our society, were over 11 times less likely to be protected by a vaccine than those getting adequate sleep. 11 times, not 2 times, not 5, not 7, 11 times.
Wow.
So this seems like it's a second tier thing, but it's a first tier thing. It makes everything work better, whether you have a pharmaceutical intervention or just a general being a human in the real world. These are things your genes require, your immune system requires. So one of the big issues today is this cytokine storm, right? That's what people hear, the headlines. The cytokine, it sounds scary, right? You got the cytokine storm. Or for me, when I first heard it, I was like, sounds like, I don't know, Thor's doing his thing. He's got his Mjolnir and the storm is happening.
It sounds cool. It sounds like something out of like the latest Avengers.
That's it.
Flick.
That's what I picked up. But with the cytokine storm, this is basically an overreaction of the immune system, and this gets into the topic of inflammation. And inflammation isn't a bad thing. It's a miraculous system that's evolved with us over countless, like we're talking millions of years of evolution here. But it's a hyper intelligent system that the immune response essentially is kind of a distress signal for the body to signal immune parameters, immune cells to come to the site of infection, to defend against a pathogen, or to come to the site of an injury. It's an absolutely essential in healing. Without inflammation, you would never heal from anything. And so, but now if we're getting to a state of chronic inflammation or an overactive response of inflammation, that's when things can get a little bit sketchy. So with the cytokine storm, but this was published in PLOS One, so it's a Public Library of Science One, they uncovered that folks who are sleep deprived have excessive response in the increased production and activity of pro-inflammatory cytokines. This was well known. And also, when individuals are sleep deprived, because cytokines, there are different ones. There are interleukins, there are chemokines. It's not just one thing. And also, here's the thing. What are they? They're proteins. What are proteins made of? Food. But anyway, so we'll just leave that as a little sidebar. But there are different types of cytokines, and some cytokines are actually required to regulate our sleep cycle. So some of them are involved in like helping to shift you into REM sleep, for example. And so it's really fascinating, really cool how our immune system is involved in sleep itself. They're like intertwined so deeply. But sleep deprivation reduces the production of these anti-inflammatory, sleep fortifying cytokines and increases pro-inflammatory cytokines. So could this be a contributing factor to the poor outcomes we've seen with, again, 115 Americans regularly being sleep deprived? I mean, come on, like I don't have to make this stuff up. It's so obvious. Are we doing anything about it? Of course not. Not once has this type of information been mentioned. And this shouldn't be surprising. For me, in the beginning, I honestly went through, and I know a lot of people felt the same. I went through phases. Initially, I was kind of confused and surprised. Like, why are we not talking about getting folks healthier? Like, I saw the data coming out of Italy. I was like, we're in trouble here. Like, we're so unhealthy as a society. Let's talk about like making sure that our citizens are getting more resilient, helping to, fortify their immune system, all those things, especially because we didn't have any viable treatments. And so, well, agreed upon treatments, let's say that.
Mm.
And when I didn't hear a peep about it, like after a couple of weeks, I'm just like, yeah, this is because this never gets talked about anyway. So I don't know what I was thinking. And so I took it upon myself to really take things to an entirely new level and to share that information, to share the data, because every single thing I said at the beginning has come to pass, everything. And one of those things, so about a month into it, so this was probably April, May, I was seeing the very concerning amount of fear being like, there was the death toll ticker
Mm.
on CNN, like
Mm.
relegating human lives to numbers on the screen. And I was like, something's not right. This is not right. It's not okay. Why are we not hearing about any type of solution or any good things happening? We had a lot of folks who were, not even, being asymptomatic, the vast majority. So after looking at things long term, we're talking almost 9 out of 10 folks having mild symptoms or no symptoms at all. It's just like there's no context here, so it's just fear, fear, fear. And so what I did was, and I also don't want to lean onto my own experience as well. So I reached out. First person I talked to was an epidemiologist. First person I talked to. The next person, when I was looking at like, is this an issue with this kind of rampant fear? And I reached out to Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton, who cell biologist. He's the pioneer. Like the reason people know the term epigenetics in our culture is because of Bruce Lipton. And so I got on a call with him and I asked him about these things. And in many ways, it was affirming what I knew, but also he hit me with something that, again, I had to be open to accept because I was still talking about like, we got to make sure we're eating well. We got to make sure this and that. And he's like, no, the mind is the most powerful epigenetic controller, Shawn. And he just brought me back to that thing that I knew, which is every thought we have creates chemistry in our body. Like we have the most powerful pharmacy in the universe, literally in our system. And it's beyond bioidentical. It is identical. It is made for you. And so I knew based on the conversation, based on my 20 years of experience, with people not having a logical fear that had some context around it, that can allow them to still function in the world and not be afraid of, seeing somebody outside, for example. And I knew that what's likely going to happen, because what that does is it creates a cortisol driven response in the body, which is in a short instance, it can be supportive if fear happens with the immune system based
Mm.
on our evolutionary biology. But chronic, as days go by, weeks, months of you being in terror and constantly watching the news, wow. What happens is the immune system essentially is getting disrupted to such a degree that if we're talking about these pro-inflammatory cytokines, so one of these studies, and this was looking at the psychosomatic effects of COVID-19,
Mm.
was the title of the paper essentially. And they were just affirming like, hey, when we get into this state where we're experiencing these mental health challenges, it's increasing inflammation in the body.
Mm.
And now you get a pro-inflammatory pre-inflamed state, and then you meet with a disease that has a tropism towards the lung tissue, towards the endothelium, that is pro-inflammatory. What do you think is going to happen? So here's how it all played out. Okay, so I'm bringing this up like, hey, we've got to do something about the fear propagation. We definitely need to exercise caution, do things smart, but let's lean into the evidence and what we can do here and all the good things that are happening in the world, all the people that are okay. And how are they okay? Let's talk about those things. None of that was happening. And so I was just seeing it mapped out. And here's what happened. The CDC, and this was just about 2 months ago, published a report. And they analyzed, and of course you could throw this in the show notes for everybody, because this one is seeing is believing, for real. They analyzed over 540,000 COVID-19 patients from over 800 US hospitals. And after analyzing the data, they found that the number one risk factor for death from COVID-19 is obesity. Number
Mm.
one. We know that already. Are we doing anything about it? Of course not. But we know it. But here's the thing. The second leading risk factor for death from COVID-19 in this report, published by the CDC, was anxiety and fear-related disorders.
Wow.
The second leading cause second leading risk factor for death. That should it should be the biggest thing. It should be on all the headlines. What? How is fear involved in death from COVID-19? But the same media outlets that would share something like that, it would be going against what they're about.
Hmm.
That's what they do. And you probably caught Charlie Chester, CNN getting caught on the hot mic. Did you see that video?
No, what was that about?
What?
What?
I've shared it I even put it into different content pieces. It just went viral, crazy, crazy stuff. So he got caught on a hot mic, the technical director of CNN. And by the all news networks, I'm not pro any of these news networks. Please understand at this point. But he got caught on a hot mic, somebody, this news network. And some people who know about this, I don't care about the news network that caught him. It's more of an internet style news network,
Yeah,
guerrilla style, really, doing this journalism a different way. I don't care about who they are, what they're about. I care about the information
of
and
course.
what was revealed. But he was caught on the hot mic saying that, they asked him about the death toll ticker. And he was like, COVID is gangbusters for ratings. He was
Wow.
like, we put the death toll ticker up. And he's like, some days we see it and I'm just like, it should be higher. It should be higher. And he's like, man, that's messed up that I'm even thinking that. We're talking about human lives here. And he's
Hmm.
caught saying this. And then he's saying that we purposely put it there. And he says the words that we hear. We hear people say these words, but he said, if it bleeds, it leads. He said the words out of his own mouth. He's one step under the director at the channel. And the person asked him also, why don't you put up a recovery ticker? I put that question into the internet world when this all happened, right? So I know that there's a connection there. Why don't they put up a recovery ticker to actually have some context here? And he looked just kind of thrown off, like what? He didn't understand the question, and he was like, because that's not scary.
Hmm.
And then he mentioned that after the onslaught of fear at the end of the segment, so maybe it's like 55 minutes of fear. That last segment, they do something is called, the feel good story, right? So he said it's kind of like the ice cream at the end of the suffering, right?
Wow.
And so just to hear it out of the mouth but again, like you didn't even hear this. You know what I'm saying? It's just like that stuff is like here today, gone today. We
Yeah.
know that they're happening. People even they can see and they could still be like, well, I love fill in the blank reporter. You know what I mean? And we've got to understand that the systems that are controlling our decisions and propagating fear, they've been complicit in the deaths of so many people because fear is literally tearing our biology apart. We were not designed to be afraid like this all the time. It's incredibly abnormal and it's creating more susceptibility. And I just want to stand for something, to do something about it, to make people feel more empowered. Yes, be intelligent, be cautious, but don't be enthralled and imprisoned by fear. That's going to lead to an early demise. Period. End of story.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've worked in media for, at this point, 20 something years and almost 20 years. And if it bleeds, it leads. I mean, it has pervaded media since the beginning of media. Advertisers love it. It makes people really sort of emotional and reactive, and it keeps them glued to the screen because it's conflict. I mean, what is like the central theme in any successful story, right? It's conflict.
Yeah.
And so I think what people have neglected to acknowledge over the past couple of months is that media, I mean, the mainstream media really it's a storytelling medium. It's not its job is not to present facts, right? Because facts are boring. Facts tell, stories sell. And we know that the lights are kept on, as you mentioned, I was at the gym today and it blew my mind. There are like 8 TVs above the cardio machines, and about half of them are playing CNN. And then the other half are playing various channels, soap operas and things like that. And it blew my mind because I looked up at the TVs and I kid you not, Shawn, there were at the same time on 3 different networks, pharmaceutical ads.
Mm. Wow.
Those are
Yeah.
those are the companies that are paying the bills for the most part,
Yeah.
for these networks,
Yeah.
these legacy media
So
companies.
check this out. This is really a fascinating thing because one of the biggest risk factors for severe outcomes from from COVID-19, and again, we could throw the study in the show notes for everybody, is polypharmacy. And so polypharmacy is essentially taking multiple medications for multiple reasons, right? So you would think, so number, again, this is a major risk factor for severe outcomes from COVID-19 in this particular report. And you would think it's because the person has these underlying susceptibilities. That's why they're taking all these different drugs.
They're sicker, yeah.
But it wasn't. The researchers dug in deep. And I love this. This is what I love about all this stuff that's happening in the world. We have scientists, we're asking questions. And if they're allowed to ask these questions, we can dig in and actually look at what does the data show.
Some on social media seem to imply that you're not even allowed to ask questions.
Right.
So I love that you're asking these questions.
And so what they uncovered was that it's not just the underlying health issues, it's the drugs themselves. In particular, they identified 3 of them that were found to be the most pervasive as far as leading to worse health outcomes from COVID-19. One of them was antipsychotic drugs. That's the number one, which why? Why is that? And this is, I mean, they're hot on the streets we were just dealing with so much mental distress. But what it is, this goes back to Dr. Candace Pert, who she discovered the opiate receptor. All right, she's pretty freaking smart, but she shared some data, and this was like really early in my career. I'm so thankful that I got the opportunity to be exposed to this kind of information. That basically neuropeptides are a primary channel for viruses to enter cells, right? And so again, she discovered the opiate receptor. All right, she's pretty smart, but she was like, there's a very similar function here with neuropeptides and viruses actually being able to gain access to a cell. And so if we have something, and she called them at the time these molecules of emotion, if there's disruption here, it can very likely lead to an increased incidence of a viral infection if there's a lot of abnormality with our neuropeptides, neurotransmitters, hormones, et cetera, right? So that kind of starts to fill in the explanation for me with that a little bit. But the ones that had a lot more solid science, because that one is still, it's dealing with the mind. And honestly, we're still just not at a good place yet where we can accept that that's a big factor. But the other two, the second most pervasive one was proton pump inhibitors. So dealing with the gastrointestinal tract. And so the researchers found, and this was in multiple studies, that SARS-CoV-2 is at least partly an enteric infection, all right? So dealing with the gastrointestinal tract. And it's ripe with these ACE2 receptors here. And so they were essentially leaning into the point that these proton pump inhibitors are causing so much distress and or masking symptoms that need to be addressed, that this is leading to a greater uptick in severe outcomes from COVID-19. And then there was a study that was published in the journal Gut, all right? And this one was nuts, man. So they actually asked the question, and they looked at people's microbiome who were coming in with COVID. And they found repeatedly the vast majority of these folks had significant decrease in these immunomodulatory bacteria in their gut.
Wow.
And so with that said, now what they didn't identify in the study was this pre them contracting the virus, or was COVID causing the issue? And I believe it's the former, which is they're already experiencing dysbiosis, which a vast majority of folks in our society today are. They're preconditioned to severe infections, right? So that was dealing with the proton pump inhibitors. Again, treating a symptom. We're talking about a proton pump inhibitor, not the underlying cause of the gastrointestinal distress. The third one was opiates, which this particular issue, man, I mean, 500,000 people have died, that have been acknowledged by, the CDC and, these regulatory agencies that have died from opiates. And many of these folks, they were not addiction prone. Like that was the story, the framing in the beginning. But these are very, very powerful drugs that, I mean, the root of this particular category of drugs, humans have been tinkering with this stuff for centuries, right? And so what they found was that folks who have a diagnosed opioid use disorder had over 10 times more likelihood of contracting a COVID infection. All right. Now, here's the fun fact about the situation. I mentioned Johnson & Johnson earlier. They're actually the world's largest manufacturer of opium used to make opioids.
Wow.
Right. So they're actually the organization that provides opium to a lot of other pharmaceutical companies. They're like El Chapo. They're like the big boss. All right. And they actually, they make it, it's called it's a genetically modified, quote, super poppy. All
Hmm.
right. So it's like, it's on some whole other level stuff, man. And so they've got that aspect. Again, criminal case. Like they were caught hiding evidence, knowing that these drugs were very, very dangerous, and putting those onto the market and supporting other companies in doing it. So they're caught with this and getting fined, and them along with a couple of their organizations, $26 billion fine. It's
Wow.
massive. It's insane. They had to do something pretty bad. But for them, it's just kind of a day in the life, because they're making billions now from their particular part of the vaccine campaign. And so many of these things kind of cancel out. Like, we've got entities who are helping to create illness, to create disease, and then they got a solution for you at the same time. And so this is where we get into this very twisted reality that we live in, where folks aren't, they have to understand, you got to take yourself out of the system, you know, and understand there can be good things that come from these organizations. There are good people that work at Johnson and Johnson, but the environment that they exist in is not about health. And now, just in the recent, like, last, couple of years, Johnson & Johnson in particular just keeps getting hit with more and more stuff where they're hiding signs.
Hmm.
The asbestos issue,
In the
the
talc,
yeah,
in the baby powder.
we got that.
That was a big one. I mean, I would not, I, good reason to to distrust a company like that.
Yeah.
And I'm not against pharmaceuticals, you know,
Me neither.
for
Me neither.
no, I mean, people, obviously there are people that need them. We talked about acute, in the acute setting. Um, but it's just become too over the top, like too intense, the push to take these various drugs, whatever they happen to be. Also, opioid drugs depress respiratory function.
Mm.
I learned this when, my mother in her final months was on morphine, and it's a tightrope that you've got to walk, balancing the palliative qualities of the drugs with the fact that they can kill you
Yeah, right.
if you take too much because of that, for that reason. So it's really tricky. And
Yeah, everything has its place.
everything has its
Everything
place.
has its place, but we do need, again, like, just look at the results.
Mm.
Our system is so pharmaceutical heavy, like, but we have to understand too, and just be honest about it. We're talking about, our healthcare system is a $4 trillion a year system. All right, $4 trillion. There's a lot of money being made off the farming of sick people,
Yeah.
you know. And again, even when we have successful drugs come along that can be used for chronic conditions, it's still not addressing the underlying cause of the disease, which, according to the Journal of the American Medical Association, for example, 2018, their meta-analysis, poor diet, number one leading cause of chronic diseases in our society. Like, this is well known. We know this stuff. I would probably argue, I'm a nutritionist, so I would say that would have been the flag that I would, plant. But
Yeah.
it's so much more than that. It's our sleep quality, it's our stress management, it's just being human. Any of these factors get off, we can have some severe outcomes. But yeah, so everything has its place. But we need to focus more on, okay, so for example, if I had someone coming into my clinic and they're on metformin, their blood sugar without is like 400. It's like, how are you alive? And for the first time, one of the things that I would do, like, I wouldn't just have 15 minutes with the person. I would schedule an hour to actually go through their medical history, and also some inquiry into their life
Mm.
and their habits, and, like, look at, like, try to pin down, like, what is off here. And of course, 9 out of 10 times you could see the stuff very plainly when people just answer a few questions. But what I would do was I would have them sit in my office, like, we'd have some rapport, have a good time, and then I would take them over to my board, and I would basically reverse engineer diabetes and demonstrate, like, okay, this is your amazing pancreas,
Mm.
and it's a loving mother, and it has two twin sons. We've got glucagon and insulin, the alpha cells and beta cells. And I start to bring the story to life for them. And then, I basically, endpoint is, we look at what are the impacts of, you know, sugar or whatever the case might be. And I could see their eyes light up when they start to understand, like, oh, That's happening in my body. That's
Mm.
what diabetes is. But oftentimes they've already taken on the identity of being a quote diabetic and not understanding that that's just a category of symptoms. And no two people with diabetes on planet Earth that's ever existed have the same diabetes. It's impossible.
Mm.
Every single human being is so different. We're the same species, of course, but even our brains are so radically different. I've been thinking and working a lot with the brain lately, and part of the reason the brain is so fragile, which is one of the great ironies of life, is that this Michio Kaku said the human brain is the most complicated object in the known universe,
Mm.
but it's also the most fragile. Like it's like the consistency of soft butter. And so it's fully encased in bone, which is cool. But the part of the reason that it has to stay in such a pliable modality is that every microsecond, like your thinking is changing your brain. It's constantly changing so fast. And so having this as the kind of foundational tenet here and looking inside a little bit more and understanding how all these things fit together, like it can be so much more empowering if people want to embrace that and take back control of their thinking a little bit. So yeah, when it comes to whether it's the brain, whether it's the diabetes or this diabesity kind of category phenomenon
Mm.
that's happening, as I'm explaining it to them, I can see their eyes light up, and I can see that and one of the things I would share is that, going back to my initial point, their metabolic individuality. And so that's what I've been calling, and since Eat Smarter came out, your metabolic fingerprint.
I like that.
Like no two people have the same fingerprint. And our microbiome, we have a microbial fingerprint
Mm.
that's completely, and even yourself later today, your microbiome is going to be different. Like if you fart, like your microbiome is going to change, or you sneeze, or the wind blows a certain way. It's so fluid and changeable, and embracing that uniqueness and understanding that I am not this label. I am not this diabetes label. I am not this heart disease label, this fill in the blank. I'm a human being, and I have these symptoms that my body's expressing, and then inquiring, why is my body expressing these symptoms? What's the reason? What's the cause? Let's deal with the cause instead of covering up those symptoms. Because if you don't, what happens, like for example, with the statins, which is well established now, I was talking about this 10 years ago. I can't believe I'm still talking about this. But early reports, and now it's affirmed, taking a statin, 30% greater incidence of developing diabetes.
Mm.
Why? We're covering up something. The body is responding a certain way, trying to express like, hey, something is off here. You might have an exposure that's causing this. It might be something you're bringing in to your internal environment. You might be, uh, you know, excessively sleep deprived, or whatever the case might be. You're not abiding by a certain principle or law that I need to express health and to feel good. I'm going to give you this feedback. And instead of us listening to our bodies, which should be more important than ever, we're turning to expertism for people who don't really even understand what health is at its foundation. They can keep you alive, they can treat symptoms, but oftentimes they're not very good at actually addressing the cause and getting people healthy.
Yeah, you put on the nightly news, and you would almost be inclined to believe that heart disease is the result of statin deficiency, that you need statins to have a healthy heart. It's insane. So, my question to you is then a question of practicality. They plug you, Shawn Stevenson, into primetime network TV, nightly news. You've got a message for America, right? We know that America is a big country. There's a very uneven distribution of resources. Food access is a big question. So, what do you recommend? What should our politicians then be recommending? You brought up the issue of bioindividuality, which is such a great point to bring up.
Yeah.
Everybody's different. So then how do you make a statement to everybody that's going to move the needle on public health? I mean, is it just like go to your local Barnes and Noble and find a diet book that appeals to you, or like what is then the advice?
Oh, no, I like the free stuff first. I mean, if we had an authority figure, somebody who's attributing to, having that authority, one of these health officials, to simply state some data in a way that's compelling, to say, hey, listen, we know early on from this experience that our natural killer cells are incredibly effective at killing SARS-CoV-2 infected cells, right? And researchers at Appalachian State University have uncovered that taking a 30-minute walk dramatically increases the activity and production of your NK cells and your neutrophils and other immune parameters. We need you, America, to get out there and walk 20 to 30 minutes a day
Mm.
to help to fortify and protect our medical system. We want to make sure that we can keep our hospitals and beds open for people that need them. We need you to take a little bit of initiative and get out there and walk, America. All right. This is one of the and we can do our superficial mitigation strategies, but if that message, do you know people would have been all over it? They
Mm.
would have been on it, taking it on as a responsibility, because that's the thing that's happened now is that it's been framed in such a way that your health is now something that is a potential problem for others, right? And so the regulation of your own health is to protect other people. So using that leverage, but using it ethically could have been remarkable. So that's number one. And walking is free.
Yeah.
It's free, you know? And then, but then the whataboutism can kick in, right? Where people can say things like, well, some people don't have access to walking.
Some people don't. Some people don't have legs.
Yeah, right. Some people don't have legs, but more particularly, some people don't have safe conditions where they can walk. I'm from Ferguson, Missouri. People don't know what that's like. They don't know about the environment being a problem with you. Like literally, me going to the basketball court, like there's a significant chance versus if I lived in Chesterfield, Missouri, that I could die. It's not that big of a chance though. Like life is still cool. People are good pretty much everywhere you go. But the risk is significant compared to other places, right? But still, I cannot be imprisoned in my own home. And nobody that I knew was. We still got out and lived our lives because we had to. And so the people who are coming along and saying people don't have access, they don't know nothing about it. They don't know what not having access looks like. And I don't need your permission to tell people this because I actually know what it's like. My issue was I didn't know that it mattered. I didn't have exposure. I didn't have access to knowing what to eat or that I needed to exercise because my environment was telling me when I walk out my door of that apartment complex, this is no joke, within a 1.5 mile radius, there's 2 McDonald's, there's Popeye's Chicken, Lee's Chicken, Domino's, Papa John's, Dairy Queen, Chinese food, but this is not like a nice Chinese restaurant. This is like bulletproof glass. There's Steak and Shake if you got a couple extra dollars. There's Lion's Choice, Krispy Kreme's, Burger King, another Chinese food restaurant, multiple liquor stores, Jack in the Box, Wendy's, and Pasta House if you want to go on a date. All right.
Wow.
This is just outside my apartment complex. And that's not even all. There's also Taco Bell. I can keep going.
Wow.
I'm inundated with this. I didn't know what health looked like. And I was eating this stuff I'm not exaggerating. I ate fast food every day because it was cheap. It's cheap and it tastes good. I didn't know that it mattered. All I needed was exposure. I'm here with you today with Max Lugavere because I got exposure. And it was because of my own challenge, my own health struggles. But once it became apparent that it's my responsibility to take care of my health, now I start to see opportunity. Now I start to see I'm not just in prison in this kind of jungle of, I struggle to even call it food now. But if I have to, I can go outside of my environment a little bit. Because even if it's 20 minutes away to get to fill in the blank, I can find a way there if it matters, because I could find a way to go get the new Rams jacket. This is prior to the Rams leaving St. Louis. But, it's just a matter of access, exposure, importance. I had a driving force for me to get better, So this is a free intervention. Every American should have the right to know about it, that it matters, because it does. And it can have magnitudes of effectiveness that outperform a lot of the pharmaceutical interventions. But you would never hear that story. That doesn't make anybody money, unfortunately. So that's what I would say, if I had that microphone. And I've done it, man. Like literally, even with Eat Smarter, I kind of rebelled. I didn't want to do any major media. Like I'm just sick of it. People aren't even, it could be a little bit of having a problem with the industry because I know people aren't tuning in for that. They're not, and you've done a lot of it too.
Mm.
You know, they might, if they're maybe it's a health focused show, of course, like we've both done that. But if it's like, me going on CNN, I've done it. I've done CNN, HLN, fill in the blank. I'm sick of it, man. I'm sick of it because people are not, even the organization themselves aren't really focused on those things. And so, but if I was to have that mic, that's the one I would say 30-minute walk a day, America, 20-minute walk a day. It's our responsibility as citizens here in this great nation. The other thing would be, and there's so many simple things, but this would be crazy to say what I'm about to say. But I would tell people to turn off the TV. You're watching me on. After this message, turn it off. The journal Stress and Health found that folks who don't cope well with stress have a dramatic suppression of their natural killer cell
Mm.
production and activity. We know this. I've already outlined multiple ways of looking at this scenario, but I'd share a little bit of data and again point to how this is interacting with COVID-19, how stress is a big killer. Like, hey, listen, I know that this is a concerning situation, but we don't want you to go overboard and to be imprisoned. I want you to turn this television off and go and sit down and have a conversation with somebody you love. Or turn on something funny, put on a funny movie and laugh because we actually have some pretty sound data that, and this is real as well. Actually, I'm gonna actually look up the study right now. So edit this.
Dude, I like that. It reminds me of there was a study that I came across recently. I forget the details of the study, but it essentially it explored the human preference for agitation and for pleasure. And humans derive a disproportionate amount of pleasure from things that are agitating. We go to movies
Right.
to watch conflict. Why do we enjoy horror movies, right?
Mm,
Horror movies are not pleasant to sit through, but we just love feeling agitated because then we get the release
right.
of the dopamine spike that occurs when we finally, turn off the TV or leave the movie theater and we're unscathed. But humans love it, man. We're drawn to conflict and adversity like moths to a flame. It's why traffic bottlenecks when there's an accident on the side of the
Yeah.
road. You don't want to see somebody injured. You don't hope that, you don't go about your day hoping to come across an injured or a suffering person. But yet, when the opportunity presents itself, we're drawn to it. We love to watch it. And I think that's one of the problems. It's like hardwired in us almost why it can be so difficult for us to turn off the TV.
Yeah. We're very strange and miraculous and beautiful and weird and terrible. We're all the things, man. But at the end of the day, I think that this time is offering such a possibility for what we can be. And the study that I was going to mention, this is a study conducted at Indiana State University School of Nursing, found that laughter is able to reduce stress and improve natural killer cell activity. Right.
Wow.
So I'm just leaning into the natural killer cell side. I could do this in 50 different ways, 500 different ways. And like these are things that we are drawn towards as well, and making that a responsibility. What if that was the message that we were receiving, But it's just like, so exercise your way from COVID, huh? Or laugh your way from COVID. No, we're talking about the science. We're talking about stacking conditions. We're not talking about a miracle cure or anything like that. We're talking about the things that actually make your immune system resilient, which what we've seen and how this stuff has gone down, it's because of our massive susceptibility to all manner of infectious diseases, why things have gone so bad. You know, the CDC's latest report, 95% of folks who passed away with SARS-CoV-2 on their death certificate, an average of 4 pre-existing chronic diseases and or comorbidities. All right. So, but at least one pre-existing chronic disease in that latest report that I mentioned with the 540,000 folks. So, but on average, 4 pre-existing chronic diseases and or comorbidities for 95% of the folks. But then the story gets like, well, healthy people too. Yes, we can all get sick and that's okay. It's a part of life. But we want to stack conditions in our favor so that it's the exception, not the rule, which it is. But what that does is that whataboutism takes away from what is the biggest problem. And the biggest problem is our pre-existing health here in this country. And now that things are so crazy, this is the other thing that it gave me a lot more peace. is that since things have been kind of just tossed up in the air and flipped around and put into like a Vitamix right now, they're so much easier to change. When the systems are just rolling along, dude, like I'll tell people everything. Like I'm completely transparent. The American Heart Association, they reached out to me. They're like, "Hey, we want you to do a talk for us, whatever." Like these organizations have been reaching out to me for years. I've spoken at the biggest cancer society event, like, it's like thousands of people. It's like one of those walks for the cure, like it's like 8,000 people and I'm doing my little 10 minutes on health or whatever the case might be. This stuff is real and it's visceral and it can be done in a way that's agreeable, non-threatening, but we also have to call things out. We got to be honest right now and just like look at, are things going okay?
Mm.
And just be honest about it, because from that place of honesty we can actually get to solution. And part of the reason I was even there at those different events was because I know that everything has its place. But if we're not, again, let's help the individual to actually be empowered and to be healthy, to have a basic level of resilience when they're faced with whatever it is, because we're going to be faced with stuff, and as of now, I really do believe now that we're in such a more poor state of health than when all this started, we're definitely not out of the woods. We're definitely not. But it's not too late for us to shift our attention because the next thing is going to come.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw that movie. It's called, I think it's called, no, is it Mockingbird? Something, but it's about COVID-23.
Oh, I
Songbird.
Songbird.
Yeah, I think that's the name of it. Maybe that's not it.
Heard of it.
Yeah.
Haven't
So,
seen it.
but it's just, and this happened at the very beginning of this pandemic, and it's just like, oh, that's crazy. That would now. I mean, if we're like looking at it, so is the
Studio really jumped on that one, huh?
right? Is the Mu variant? Is it like technically COVID-21, or you know what I mean? Like now we're getting into that place where we're seeing things continue to unfold in a way that's not advantageous for us. This stuff is just going to keep happening. The next thing is going to happen. It might be 10 years from now, but if we don't get healthier as a nation, we're going to continue to be victims. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, that's the message is, simple principles of health. We don't got to get complicated. But the beautiful part is once people start to feel better, they want more.
Mm.
They want to know that I don't want to talk, honestly, Max, I don't want to talk about this stuff. I don't want to talk about walking. I want to talk about how we could be superhuman. Like I'm already on the next thing. I'm already on that. And so, but it's a necessity right now. So yeah, I mean, there's always another level. And once people get that, and I've seen it happen so many times, thousands of times, personally in my practice, and also just, speaking events, things like that. Now collectively, we have audiences of, we have millions and millions of people have been exposed to our work, and seeing when people get that little bit of joy or that little bit of empowerment, that little bit of extra health, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And it becomes a different type of adventure. And I know that we could spark that in everybody.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed that conversation, you're going to love this one.
I had sort of a winding path with my career. I started out as a teacher, actually. Had a degree in special education and thought that teaching and being an administrator was going to be my life career. And then I got my first job working with kids with autism and other pretty severe emotional and behavioral challenges, and really fell in love with that and quickly realized that what I was doing in the classroom, it was great, but it was like 6 hours a day. And I had all the parents saying, we need help, we need support, what should I be doing at home? And that really got me interested in delving into more the family side of it. So I went back to school and got a doctorate in clinical psychology so that I could take families from first noticing that there were issues and problems through the diagnostic process and all the way through really family-based treatment. So that led me to opening my own practice, mainly because I don't do well working for other people. I sort of have ways I want to do things based on the research and my experience. And so opened my own practice, really specializing in holistic family-based treatment for kids, all the way from little ones all the way up through young adults. And then along the way, began to realize that everything that I had learned in my educational background and my clinical psychology training, it was getting good results, but there was a missing piece. I started noticing that lots of the kids coming in had common physiological things in their history: eczema, allergies, issues with constipation, with chronic ear infections, things like that. And I went, I wonder what's going on there. And at the same time had two of my own kids, because by that point I was a parent, who were also having some issues. And I was wondering about the connections, and I delved into the research and was really amazed to find this whole realm of scientific literature about the connections between physical health and mental health and brain-based issues for adults and kids that I had never been exposed to or learned about in my traditional clinical psychology training or my education background. And so that got me excited about other things that I could bring to the table for these kids and these families. So I actually went back to school again, and got a master's in nutrition and integrative health, and I'm board certified in nutrition now, because I think that that's such an integral piece to bring to the picture of not only understanding what's at the root of symptoms for a lot of kids, but also what needs to happen from a treatment standpoint to really address these things. So yeah, that's sort of the journey that I've taken with this.
That's amazing. It reminds me of, I was doing a little bit of reading earlier this week about Ansel Keys.
Mm-hmm.
He was a scientist who he developed the K ration. He was a celebrated scientist, but I think, a lot of people have demonized him over the past couple of years because of this idea, the narrative that he created these very early studies that led to the ultimate demonization of fat, saturated fat, dietary cholesterol, and things like that. But the reason why I bring it up is because, he started to do this research at a time when scientists couldn't fathom that there was a connection between diet and cardiovascular health.
Yeah.
It was at the birth of nutrition science that he really got going. And the way that you're talking sounds like you're very much in that camp where it's like you're making these connections for the first time, that actually diet does have an impact on the health and the functioning of the brain.
Yeah.
Which to me is like, we've already learned so much just over the past couple of years, and we're only going to learn more in the coming years. So when did you then decide to become a nutritionist?
Yeah, it was really around that time when I started looking at, wow, there's research evidence for this. And I sort of felt like, why is this the first time I'm hearing about this, right? I've been in school forever. I have 2 master's degrees, a PhD, and I don't know anything about this. And that's really what got me interested in, I need to delve into the science here more. I need to understand more of these connections. I'd always felt like, as an adult, I fed myself pretty well, always felt like I was feeding my kids well. And I look back now and I'm like, I would do things so differently based on what I know, but that's what I knew at the time. And it was probably better than still what many people feed their kids. But when you really delve into looking at the food and mood and brain function connection, of course it makes perfect sense, right? The brain and the body are totally interconnected. How could it be possible that what we're eating or what we're feeding our kids doesn't have everything to do with their mood, their anxiety, their behavior, their ability to focus? Of course, it inherently makes sense. And yet this is like a fringe position still in some ways, nutritional psychiatry and nutritional psychology are becoming more widely known. There are more professionals interested in looking at that, mainly because the effectiveness of the traditional routes that we've used to treat people with mental health and brain-based issues, not great. And so, there's a lot more people interested in what else can we do. But this is still a pretty revolutionary idea. I mean, if you talk to a lot of even primary care physicians, pediatricians on a basic level, they'll say, yeah, well, food matters. But when a kid comes in with issues, they're not looking at, wow, let's check your vitamin D level or your iron status, or let's talk about what's your kid eating, on a daily basis, or what are some of the challenges there, digging into some of that. It's just not done routinely. And I hope that that's changing. And I hope that that really does become the norm, that, I'd love to say 10 years from now, but maybe 20 years from now, that this is really the standard of care, that things like food, eating habits, lifestyle habits more broadly, sleep, screen time, movement, stress levels, that all of those things are the first things that we're looking at and digging into and talking with families about when kids are struggling, because the data's there that it makes a really big difference. It's just shifting that to be the focus of practice, as opposed to, well, talk to the school about getting some support, or go see a counselor, or here's your prescription. And it's not that any of those things are bad. It's just that there's so much more that we can do to get to the root of these things. And I find that really empowering. I find that empowering as a parent of 4 kids myself. And I find it really empowering for all of the families out there that are struggling with some of these things, that there are really simple, really effective things that you can do.
That's amazing. Well, before we get into those, what are some of the kinds of problems that you see present, I guess, most frequently in your clinic?
Yeah. So my clinic, again, we treat little ones all the way through young adults. So we're seeing anywhere from babies through young adults. That's sort of, it's gotten a little bit older over time. I would say earlier it's like 21. Now we're talking like mid-20s, even up to 30, at this point. And we see a broad range of things. Some of the most common things are ADHD, depression, anxiety, and just more broadly, like behavioral types of disorders. Kids who have what we call dysregulated behaviors. They just seem to not be able to manage themselves well. And then, of course, we see quite a lot of autism spectrum disorder, and then some more what we would call severe presentations, often kids with a very significant trauma history, kids who are maybe born very prematurely and so have a lot of medical challenges along with brain-based, types of things. So, and one of my specialties at the clinic is really treating kids and young adults who have been what we would call treatment resistant, which I hate that term because really it just means that no one's really looked at what's going on. But these are kids who have been placed on all of the different kinds of medications. They've been through the traditional counseling things. They're getting all of those things and they're still not getting better. And those are the cases at this point in my career that are really interesting to me to figure out, why would this be an issue in a kid? What could be going on? What do we need to look at there? And often it involves getting them off of many of the things that maybe they've been put on that are creating additional problems, and looking at more holistically how we can address that for them.
Would you say that rates of these kinds of diagnoses are increasing? Like, are we seeing more ADHD now?
Yeah.
Are we seeing more autism now? Or are we just getting better at like diagnosing them?
Yeah, it's an important question, and the research shows that it's both. So certainly awareness, especially around autism spectrum disorder, that's huge, right? When I started my career in the mid 90s, it was still 1 in 200 kids who was diagnosed. And now we're at like 1, I think the most recent stats are 1 in 29 boys. So there certainly is greater awareness as a piece of it. But we also know that the data shows that really these conditions are on the rise. And it's that whole range of what we call neurodevelopmental disorders. So we can throw, ADHD and autism in there, but also things like learning disabilities, things like mood dysregulation issues, behavioral, kinds of things. Those are all on the rise.
Wow.
And, that really begs the question, what's going on there that so many more kids, are having these issues? But yeah, so it's both pieces.
That's so interesting. What would you say is going on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's like the crux of the issue, right? Like what's changed in our environment that's causing such a stark increase in these kinds of conditions.
Yeah. And it's not any one thing, it's a lot of things. And so when we look at how not only the environment and the world around us has changed over the last generation, but culturally, the pace of life, the things that are available. So the research shows several things. One is certainly increased toxicity in the environment. So everything from, the nutrient density and quality of food that kids are eating or not eating, to things like air quality and pollution, all of those things, chemicals that kids are exposed to in utero, as well as, during their childhood. So we know those are factors, but there are also factors like screen time. The fact that, when I didn't have my first cell phone, and it certainly wasn't a smartphone. I didn't have a cell phone until adulthood, right? But my kids have grown up with those things around all the time. And so while that's wonderful in many ways, there's also sort of that pendulum swinging of, wow, all of this is there now. And how do we actually regulate and manage that? And we're still trying to figure that out as adults. And then we're supposed to be helping our kids figure that out, right? But there's really compelling data to show that excessive use of screens, of technology, is a piece of what we're seeing on a number of levels with kids. We also have the most sedentary generation in history, and that was pre-COVID. And now with COVID, that's only been exacerbated. The data is really not good coming out of that. So we've got sedentary kids, and people often think about that from the standpoint of physical health, right? Like kids need to move so that they have a healthy weight. Actually, physical movement is critical for brain development and the development of connections in the brain that allow for higher level functions like academic learning, like being able to focus, being able to write your name. All of those things develop on a foundation of lots of experience with physical movement and activity in the environment. So when we have babies and toddlers spending a lot of time now, in front of a screen, swiping, a screen, or just not out there being as active, it has consequences for their brain development and then their later learning and behavior. So we know that there's all of these pieces. There's sleep, sleep quality has diminished. There's the busyness of families. It's one of the biggest things that we see is families are so busy. I think COVID again has helped with that. I'm hoping that many families really analyze what does going quote unquote back to normal need to look like, because for a lot of them, maybe what was normal in terms of the pace of life really wasn't good for them or their kids. So we've got really high stress levels in families, lots of sort of chaoticness and activities. We know that has a negative impact too. So I don't think it's any one thing. I think it's really a perfect storm of lots and lots of things that are coming together to create issues for our kids.
The technology piece is terrifying because, when you look at your average adult these days, they're addicted to their smartphones.
Totally.
And then you give such an addictive device. I was going to call it a substance, when you give it, like we don't allow our children to have access to addictive substances. And yet we don't bat an eye when we give them these devices that are meant to, chronically elicit these like dopamine spikes on a regular basis. And their brains are not yet developed. So
right. We have no data. It's an entire generation of guinea pigs about what the longer term repercussions of this are going to be. We know in the short term, the data shows that used at an appropriate level, which appropriate, there's sort of a wide range in the studies that have been done, but it's not all detrimental. And it's important that kids learn how to have a healthy relationship with technology because it is here to stay. It provides so many great benefits and it's going to be a part of their lives forever. But it's that finding that middle ground of how do we use it instead of letting it use us? And what does that mean long term? What does that look like for kids who maybe had excessive exposure from a very early age? What does that look like at 10, at 20, at 40? The data so far is concerning. It's not conclusive, but it's concerning. And, one of the biggest issues with that is this idea called displacement, that it's not necessarily the actual exposure to the devices themselves that's the issue. It's that it displaces all the other important things that kids should be doing to support their development, that it takes the place of them getting outside and running around and climbing trees and riding their bikes and, running through the neighborhood with their friends. It takes the place of them having real conversations with people or them doing pretend play on their own or them even just being bored and not having anything to do, which developmentally is a really important thing for kids to be bored. We know that. And kids are rarely bored anymore. And that's problematic. So it's that idea that the devices themselves aren't bad. And there's some question as to whether even the exposure is a problem, although we know it is for eye health and vision and those kinds of things. But it's this displacement. It's that kids are now spending a good portion of their waking hours doing those kinds of things on a screen as opposed to all of the other really important physical and brain-based things that they need to be doing.
I mean, when I was a kid, I remember being addicted to, maybe not, I actually wasn't, I wouldn't say that I was addicted, but I definitely enjoyed playing video games.
Sure.
But when I was a kid, those video games were attached to my television.
Yes.
So when I was in school, when I was going to and from school, when I was sitting in my dad's car, when I was, on the bus going to school, I was, my mind had the ability to wander.
That's right.
Which I guess for kids these days, they've got these devices in their pockets all the time.
Yeah. And that's one of the things. And so often parents will say, well, they're bored, they need something to do. And helping parents to understand that not only is it okay for your child to be bored, they actually need to have the experience of being bored, of not having externally driven activities and stimulation, of having to self-generate ideas, come up with things. And you know what? If they don't, that's okay. Just the experience of being in a room or wandering around outside and actually taking in everything around you. What a profoundly simple but important thing. And for a lot of kids, that is not a part of their experience. And when you get used to, you said the dopamine piece, when you get used to that constant, that next hit of external stimulation, you lose or perhaps don't develop even in the first place, depending on the age of the child, the ability to create that for yourself, the ability to self-generate interesting things, to take action on experiences, on the environment in ways that you can learn from because you're just waiting passively for the next piece of stimulation to hit you. So I get that it's a challenge sometimes for parents because they say, I need my child to be in front of the iPad. And I say, okay, but let's figure out how to find a balance there. And also, and this is sort of like, I just am a pretty straight shooter with parents. Just as a parent myself, I can get away with doing that, right? I have 4 kids, so I sort of have some lived experience with that. It's like, okay, I get it. It's easier to have the device babysit a kid, especially over the last year. Like, I get it. But also, we need to look at that as part of our responsibility as a parent and say, if we know that something is inherently not real good for them and we know there's some other things that they should be doing, then we need to take a look at that. And we need to say, as you said, just like we wouldn't give them access to things that we know are really unsafe or, addictive, we need to look at, some of these things. And electronics are definitely one of them. And, you said the addictive substance is the other addictive substance that we absolutely let kids just have constantly is sugar. Sugar and devices are the two of the biggest addictive substances that we know impact people, not just kids, but people in general. And we've got a whole lot of kids running around with a whole lot of sugar addiction and a whole lot of device, if not addiction, a whole lot of use of those. And, if we would address just those 2 things alone, we'd probably be doing, a lot better than we are.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I was bored one time and I turned a box into a costume.
Yes.
And I turned myself into a robot. I would get actually inside the box and I put little holes where I told my mom to put in little paper inputs and I would spit something out. And I was I became a robot when I was in that box.
Yeah.
But I feel like these days, if I had access to, I don't know, an iPad or something, I mean, I guess there are probably games that allow children to be creative, but within the constraints of the game or the program.
That's right.
Whereas without that, you can kind of, the world becomes your oyster.
That's exactly right. I mean, we have kids who come into the clinic who don't know how to play.
Wow.
Who, when we just put them in a room with lots of things, not electronics kind of toys where you hit buttons and things, but things like blocks, things like puppets, things like empty boxes and craft materials, and just observe what they do with them. There are many kids that really struggle in the absence of some sort of outside direction of what they should do, or they go, oh, this is so boring. I hate this. And I go, oh yeah, it probably is. And for a lot of them, then if you leave them in there, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, suddenly it's opened up this whole world of things. Like they've made a robot costume out of a box and they didn't even know that they could do that. But it's those experiences. And I think that so often parents are so busy, they don't just stop and reflect on what is my child maybe missing out on there, or how could we embed more of that? One day leads to the next, Everybody's just trying to get by. And suddenly you realize, oh my gosh, like my kid, the iPad broke, and now I'm face to face with that my kid doesn't know what to do with themselves. And, how can we shift things? So
yeah. You mentioned sugar. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about nutrition, because that's one of your areas of focus. Sugar, there's a lot of misconceptions. There are a lot of sort of, people will, on the internet say that sugar is the worst thing in the world. And then there are people who now are coming out and are sort of almost acting like apologists for sugar. Which I've seen quite a bit in the fitness community, but I'm sure exists in other realms. So talk to me a little bit about sugar.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest levers that I think, based on the research, we can pull when it comes to wanting to support kids' physical and mental health. Because and sugar's not bad, just like electronic devices aren't bad, right? I think we've lost this ability, whether it's about these topics or virtually anything else at this point, at least in the United States, to have any sort of healthy way of looking at a middle ground with things.
The ability to have nuanced thoughts.
And say, wow, probably really almost nothing is all good or all bad. There's probably a middle ground there, and maybe I can understand more about that. So these things fall in that middle ground, right? I think it's a terrible idea to say all sugar's bad, kids should never have it. Well, I mean, first of all, we know that sets kids up for eating disorders, for lots of problematic things when we, just come in and full swoop take everything out of, their diet, don't allow them any access. They don't know how to regulate themselves around it, right?
I want to talk a little bit about this. How do we, so you mentioned eating disorders. I grew up in a house where we had sugary foods. I had Gushers and Dunkaroos and Frosted Flakes and Pop-Tarts and all, and Entenmann's donuts and all sorts of crap that I enjoyed to eat. But my mother did a really good job, I thought, of telling me that these foods are not really good for you, to not eat them often, to kind of like limit your consumption of them. But we still had them. And I grew up with, I think, a healthy, I could be wrong, but I think I have a healthy relationship with food. I'm pretty sure I have a healthy relationship with food. And I'm able to acknowledge that certain foods are not good for me. But yeah, so how do we basically send this message to our children? Yeah,
I mean, it's tricky. There's so many things that go into why some kids develop disordered eating patterns. And some of it has to do with how food is approached and what's available. Some of it has to do with traumas, with, anxiety. There's all kinds of issues. But basically, if we want kids to grow up with a healthy, balanced way of understanding food, we have to be teaching them that from an early age, just talking about food in healthy, appropriate ways. Like, look at these veggies. Like, let's take a look at these. Oh, these are all different colors. What's so cool about that is each of the different colors has these amazing things that help our brain and body function better. And so when we eat a yellow pepper, we get the yellow nutrients that are good for us. And so even from a very young age, talking about that, we're going to have fish. Fish is so good for our brain. You want to, be able to really think well and do this stuff. Fish is where it's at, right? And then as kids get into the elementary years and certainly into the teen years, having more sophisticated conversations with them around that, even about the choices that we're making. I'm a big one for parents to talk about their own successes and failures. Like, oh man, those donuts looked so good today at work. And man, I had 2 of them because they just were so good. And now, I wasn't able to get my work done well this afternoon. Like my brain's just not really turned on well. And I'm kind of just feeling like my stomach doesn't feel good. I really wish I would not have eaten 2 of those, right? That's not giving a lecture. That's not telling a kid, you better not ever eat donuts. That's saying, let me just share with you what's happening with me. It's a way to give them insight into the understanding of how the things that we put in our mouth impact the way that we feel, and helping them from a young age be able to identify that for themselves, and not having a situation where nothing is around. Because I feel like there's two main groups of people that I see in the clinic, or even that I speak to, in my online stuff, people who have no understanding of this. And so everything is in their house and it's a free for all. Like everybody just eats whatever they want all the time. Or people who have ventured into sort of this health and wellness or nutrition world online or elsewhere and are like, we only have, unprocessed whole foods. We only have, and I'm like, okay, but that's not the world your child is going to exist in. And it's actually not the world they exist in now. When they go to school, they are surrounded by kids eating that. They're having birthday parties in the classroom. They're going to soccer practice. So how do we familiarize them with that? How do we expose them? How do we help them figure out how to make the best decisions for them, for how their body works, for how their brain works? And an all or nothing approach is not the way to do that.
Yeah, I agree. So should parents then, have these foods in the house and then to just offer a gentle sort of explanation, of course, not fear-based one, but like, this is good. You can eat this and enjoy this on occasion, keep them around, but maybe like on a high shelf or something. So they're not always at eye level like they are in supermarkets.
That's right.
Which junk food manufacturers love to put. They advertise their products with like primary colors. They're always at eye level for children. It's insane.
Well, the marketing with kids, like there have been some really interesting studies done in the last couple of years looking at child food product consumption based directly on the efforts of food corporations and advertisers to target them. And, even there was an interesting one done online recently where kid YouTube influencers are now getting huge contracts from food companies to have their products out because that is so compelling to children. Used to be on TV, right? You and I were exposed to ads for things on TV and it would be like, oh, mom, get this for us, get this for us. And the research shows that when kids ask for things, parents tend to get it. Now kids aren't watching TV as much, but they are watching YouTube. They're using apps. And so the advertisers have gotten wise to that. So that's a big piece of it. But again, they're going to be exposed to it. So as parents, it's our responsibility to help them interpret that. Oh yeah, you saw that. Well, what do you think about that? Hey, let me show you something. Do you see, let's go to the store and check that out. That thing that you want to get. Cool. Let's go look at it. All right. Let's look at how many grams of sugar it has. Wow, that's got twice the grams of sugar that a kid your age should be having in a day. What do you think about that? Would you want to have one of these and that would be all your sugar for the day? What do you think about a food that has that much? Let's look at what some other options are. Let's compare, right? You turn that into a learning opportunity for them because I'm a big believer in avoiding language of good and bad around food for kids, even for kids with frank allergies. We don't want to talk about things as good or bad. We want to talk about how does our body respond to those things? How do I feel and function when I'm consuming that food? So yeah, we should have things around, but we should have boundaries around it, just like we do, or we should for all other things for our kids, right? Whether it's, foods or electronics or, whatever it might be. We should have some boundaries around that. And parents ultimately are in charge of what their kids are eating, right? So a kid might see the donuts in the cupboard and want those for every meal and snack. And it's up to us to say, nope, let's think about that because you already had one of those earlier. So great. And here's what I'm serving for lunch. And this is what we're having. And it doesn't involve donuts, or you can have a donut again tomorrow, or whatever languaging or whatever boundaries you want to put on that. But to help them think about, again, it's that goal of helping them to learn how to regulate themselves around this stuff and how to develop a healthy relationship with these things. Because if we just say no all the time, they're going to grow up to be teenagers who, when they're at other people's houses, go nuts with that stuff because they don't know how to think about it and how to regulate it as an adult. They'll probably really struggle. There's a lot of backlash with that. So, short of there being some kind of really, life-threatening allergy or really a significant food sensitivity where it's like, no, we cannot have that in the house. There are valid reasons to keep certain things out of the house. But even when I work with kids who have pretty restrictive diets for medical or for mental health reasons, there's still a lot of leeway that we can find in that. And, even a kid who needs to be on a gluten, dairy, soy, and egg-free diet, we better still be finding some recipes to help that parent be able to make or to purchase some cookies, some things like that, because that's just normal and appropriate and healthy. And kids need to have those experiences with those kinds of foods.
Do you think is it getting more difficult for parents?
Mm-hmm. In general, across the board, do I think it's more difficult to parent today than it probably was in previous generations? Yeah, I do.
Because parenting, it doesn't having a baby, it's not like you go to the hospital and they give you like an instruction manual.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I feel like it's just getting more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are all these like caveats. And is it a response to, just going back to the environment? Is it a response? Mm-hmm. Is it becoming more difficult because there's food, you're having to act as a counterbalance to the food marketers and the technology and all that stuff?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's interesting because, I'm one of 4 kids. So my parents raised 4 kids, and my mom has said before, she's like, I think it's a lot. You guys have it a lot harder today. I mean, with, they didn't have to deal with tech. It wasn't around. My elementary school got their first computer when I was in 5th grade, and we got to use it for 10 minutes, maybe once a month, right? These things weren't around. It wasn't a thing. Food was different, right? There wasn't nearly the amount of fast food, processed food, that kind of stuff. So in those ways, yeah, it's gotten more challenging. The world, technology is amazing, but it's made the world a more complicated place in a lot of ways, right? We move infinitely faster. There's just so much more available. And so I think it's harder for parents to stay on top of all that. And everybody's busier. The sort of you can have it all movement, which I think is awesome. I mean, as a career-driven working mom myself, I get that. And I also very, very clearly understand the limitations of that too, right? You actually can't have it all in all areas, right? There's things that have to give, and I have to prioritize giving in some areas over here in order to be able to prioritize some things with my kids over here. And I think that balance sometimes is tricky. It's tricky for people.
Yeah. We talked about sugar a little bit and how minimizing it is probably a smart idea.
Yeah.
What about fats and the fat composition of your child's diet?
Yeah, I think again, this is the thing that has grown out of sort of the broader debate or debacle, we could probably call it, around fat, right? So really, most people's prevailing idea is fat is bad. Low fat is good, fat is bad. And particularly where we need to do a lot of education with people around that is in the realm of brain health and function, because the brain is made heavily of fats. And when we have kids who aren't getting enough of the right fats and are getting too many of those inflammatory, not great fats, we know that leads to problems. We have studies linking things like lower levels of omega-3 fatty acids and high levels of omega-6s to everything from ADHD to depression. Certainly, that's a big area of research for that, to other kinds of mood issues. So we know that that's important. And the problem is that almost all of the quote unquote kid-friendly foods don't have good healthy fats in them. They've got a lot of pro-inflammatory omega-6s, things like packaged chicken nuggets, pizzas, hot dogs, all of that kind of stuff, but they are lacking in the good brain quality kind of fats that we need, like from fish and other kinds of seafood and even plants. So that's an area that I think is low-hanging fruit when a kid is struggling, especially to look at not only how we can start to shift the diet, but also supplementation is so effective there. And the data is really good on that too, of, using supplements with good quality omega-3 fatty acids. Depending on the issues, looking at what the ratio needs to be between DHA and EPA, but we know that there's really important benefits. And even for people who say, well, not every kid with ADHD is going to have their symptoms go away just from taking fish oil. That's absolutely true. But what we know is even for kids who benefit from stimulant medications, for example, we have studies showing that the benefits from those medications increase when we make sure that they're taking a supplement or eating a diet that has the right balance of particularly the omega-3s. So why wouldn't we do that, right? Why wouldn't we prescribe alongside of a stimulant medication for a child who may really benefit from that? Also, a nutrition protocol that is not only going to support their brain and their body, but help their medication work better. To me, that just makes sense.
Absolutely. I'm scared to know if you actually have this statistic, but your average adult today consumes 60% of the calories. Mm-hmm. I believe it's 58% of the calories that your average American adult consumes come from ultra processed foods.
Yeah.
I bet you it's way higher than that for kids.
It's very high. And I would have to look up what the exact current stat is, but it's very high.
Wow.
A large preponderance of the food that kids are eating. And if you think about it, particularly in the United States, in our culture, we were the ones that created the kids menu, right? At restaurants, which is like just a bizarre thing, right? Like at what point did we decide kids shouldn't be eating the rest of the things that the things that we're eating? No, what we do now, not only in restaurants, but in the grocery store, on the advertising, all of that, there's these kid-friendly foods, mac and cheese and hot dogs and pizza and the dinosaur chicken nuggets and, fruit in a cup form, tube yogurts with a whole bunch of high fructose corn syrup, artificial dyes, chemicals, all those things. So even a lot of what's marketed as healthy for kids is ultra processed, which we know does not do good things for their brain and their body. It does not set them up for a lifetime of wellness, mental health or physical health. And it just doesn't give them the fuel that they need. And so parents are like, my kid doesn't sleep well. My kid has postnasal drip all the time. My kid's constipated all the time. My kid is so anxious, they won't go to friends' houses. My kid is bouncing around the classroom and won't focus, all of these things. And it's like, okay, let's look at all of the pieces there, because there can be many pieces playing into that. Food's absolutely one of them. I don't know a kid alive who, if you feed them on what sort of are the popular things that kids want to eat, are going to function real well. That's just not how the human brain and body works, especially not for young kids who are still in the process of developing the parts of the brain that are able to do things like regulate their emotions, regulate their behaviors, manage all of that. So they don't have all of those things operational yet. And we're not giving them the building blocks they need to develop those connections. And then we throw our hands up and we're so frustrated, that they aren't managing themselves well, or that they're struggling in school, or having all of these kinds of issues. So I'm not saying nutrition is the only thing that needs to happen, but the fact that we so rarely look at it and it plays such a critical role, to me, is just such a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There were probably stretches of days that went by as a kid where the first thing that I ate for breakfast, bowl of cornflakes.
Yeah.
With probably some low fat or, some milk variant.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went to school and I had a school lunch. In New York, we had pretty decent school lunches, but even decent, it's all shelf stable food. These like lunch, what are they called? Not chefs.
Lunchables?
Like the cafeteria.
That's
women,
right. Yeah, right.
It's like pop open a can, reheat whatever it was, and then I'd go home. Maybe I'd have a piece of whole fruit, which would probably be the healthiest thing that I eat over the course of the day. And then at dinner, I would have like pasta, like noodles with butter, which at the time wasn't even real butter, but margarine. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and, it's interesting as we think about school food, or even a lot of the food programs for kids with food insecurity, because that's a huge issue. But there are some great model programs doing that beautifully. We can so improve the quality of food that we're giving to kids, not only through our school food programs, but through programs in the community. And there are models showing us how, even with the dollars that schools are given, how you can do that in a very palatable, kid-friendly, whole foods way. And, I think that's a great example. I get called in to do consultations in schools. Sometimes it's for one kid, sometimes it's for like just the kids in general. And when you arrive in the morning and you start observing, you see this really interesting pattern, right? Like the kids come in and what are they being served for breakfast? Strawberry or chocolate flavored cow's milk, right? Which actually a carton of that has more grams of sugar in it than the same size can of Coke or soda pop. Okay?
Oh my God.
But it's milk, so it's healthy. So drink up, right?
Yeah.
And then they're having, their waffles with syrup, sponsored by, I don't know if we can say brands on here, but, sponsored by the popular brands that make these packaged things, right? And so they're eating pastries and donuts and sugary cereals, but it still technically meets the requirements for the federal food program. But what we're doing there is just giving kids this rush of sugar first thing in the morning. Ooh, now they're really ready for learning, right? So they've had all this, they head into the classroom, and what happens? They start on this blood sugar roller coaster throughout the day, right? They've had all of these simple carbs and sugars. Blood sugar goes up. Now they're inattentive. They're having trouble, sitting still. There's all kinds of issues, right? And we've taken away a lot of the opportunity for them to go out on the playground even and burn those off. A lot of schools have gotten rid of a lot of the recess things and stuff like that. So, okay, blood sugar peaks, then it crashes. Now they're grumpy, irritable, foggy, sitting with their head down on the desk. But then lunch rolls around. They come back to the cafeteria. Well, now they're having their food program sanctioned, French fries with ketchup, which counts as 2 servings of fruits and vegetables.
Oh my
That's
God.
exactly right. They're having pizza, which at many schools, even at the elementary level, is offered as a daily option. Where if you don't want what else is served, we'll always have this for you, or a PB&J on white bread, again with the flavored milks. The salads consist of iceberg lettuce with some shredded, cheddar cheese, and then whatever's in the ranch dressing. And so we start that all over again, right? And there are many kids in our communities who that's the bulk of the food they're getting. And I think that's why we disproportionately see learning problems, mood problems, behavior problems in kids who come from impoverished environments. Yes, there are certainly issues of, what's going on at home and all of those kinds of things. But a piece of it is they are getting the majority of their food and nutrition from these federal or state kinds of programs. And we can be doing a much better job to feed these kids, all of the kids.
Yeah. Let's tackle breakfast. So you're a busy mom.
Yeah.
You obviously do so many things. You've got an online presence. You're an author. You've got a clinic to run, and you've got 4 kids. So for busy moms or dads that are listening, what's like a go-to, what are some of your staple breakfasts, right? Because I think one of the reasons why cereal has become so popular is because it makes it just so easy.
Yeah.
For working parents, right? But what are some healthy alternatives?
Yeah, and I'm not actually against cereal. I think there are some decent cereals. I think what we want to be focused on, especially for kids, especially if they're having some challenges, if they're having some attention or learning issues, some behavioral challenges, we want to be thinking protein first thing in the morning, right? Ideally protein and healthy fat, but I really just have people think about protein. So if you are going to have that bowl of cereal, let's look at how to do one that has whole grains, that doesn't have a lot of added sugars, and what can we pair that with? Can we do, maybe they'll eat some yogurt with, some fruit in it. Yogurt, meaning a full fat yogurt that doesn't have added sugars, not one of these swirly colored, that's not yogurt, that's sugar basically in a cup. So if they can tolerate dairy, maybe they'll do that. Or maybe we can heat up a sausage or 2 to go with that bowl of cereal. Or maybe it's a kid who will eat some eggs. And a lot of these things can be done ahead of time. Like even I'll do I have a recipe for protein balls on my website. Easy to mix up. Kids can help with that. They're tasty and they get a good balance of proteins, of healthy fats, of carbs, because especially for kids, carbs are important. I feel like this message gets lost too, especially in the realm of more extreme diets now for adults. I'll have families come in and they'll be like, we're all keto. And I'm like, well, there's the problem, because while that may be just fine for you, growing kids need carbs. So you, in your well-intentionedness, giving them, lots of meats and lots of proteins and fats, you're missing out on something really important, because kids absolutely do need enough of the right kinds of carbs. So it's really about that balance. And I'm all about things that we can prep early in the week, even on Sunday, have in the fridge for kids to grab. I am all about do what is manageable. If you can find, a protein shake or smoothie that's pretty decent that your 13-year-old is willing to, grab on their way to the bus stop in the morning, fine. Maybe it's a protein bar. Maybe it is some other packaged thing that meets more of the requirements of gives them a good boost of protein, doesn't have a ton of sugar and chemicals in it. Great. Doesn't have to be complicated. And maybe you are a family who, one or both of you as the parents is waking up in the morning and making a breakfast of, eggs and whatever for yourself, and you can make some for the kids. That's great too. There's not any one way this needs to be done. And I think that's a really important message with nutrition. And it's one of the things, Max, actually, that I appreciate about sort of your message. You talk about this doesn't have to be complicated, and we don't have to make everything super fancy or expensive. This can be easy. Let's make it easy. Let's look at some simple things that we can do, getting the amount of sugars down, looking at nutrient density, trying to get some quality proteins and fats. And let's do that in a way that is manageable and that doesn't stress everybody out so that they go, oh, we can't even do this. I did this for a day and now I can't do it. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the messaging that is out there, even a lot of well-intentioned professionals who are putting together plans for kids and families. I mean, I see some of them that come into my clinic and I'm like, I couldn't do that. And I have degrees in this, and I've been, managing special diets and nutrient-dense food for my family for a long time. Some of these programs and plans are so complicated. That's not helpful either, because now what we've done is said, okay, we're going to get really good nutrient dense food in you and also massively increase the stress level in your home so that everybody's actually worse off than they were before they started eating a nutrient dense diet. So I'm just all about making it practical and reasonable for people, because otherwise they're not going to do it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you recommended protein shakes for kids. Yeah. Because I think a lot of people think about protein shakes, as being something exclusive to bodybuilders. Wow. But that's I wish I had protein shakes when I was a kid. Some of them are so tasty. They're like milkshakes.
They are, and they're easy and they're quick. You can mix them up ahead of time. And one of my, big things is let's get kids in the kitchen. We know the research clearly shows that kids who are exposed to food and cooking and grow up even with some basic skills, they eat better when they get to adulthood. All other factors taken out, just knowing some basics in cooking, in the realm of cooking, allows them to consume a better diet. So it's a really fundamental thing we can be doing. And things like protein shakes are a great start. Teach them how to use the blender. Let's mix these up. What do you want here? They get to have choices, right? Okay, we can pick the flavor of the protein powder. What are our add-ons? We want to throw some fruits in here. Which ones do you want? What did you like last week? Let's experiment. And usually families then hone in on a couple of sort of recipes or combinations that go down really easily for their kids. And then that's a great go-to. And for kids who don't want to drink that stuff, you rarely meet a kid who doesn't want an ice cream bar or a popsicle. Well, you know what you can do with that protein smoothie is throw it in some popsicle molds, and guess what? Your 4-year-old will love that popsicle or that ice cream bar that he or she gets to have for breakfast the next morning. And it's just the protein shake, but look, it's in a fun shape with a stick on the end, and everybody's happy.
Are you kidding? I'm going to go downstairs and I'm going to literally run to the store and get popsicle molds.
Absolutely.
That sounds amazing.
Yes. It can be fun. It can be easy. And here's the thing. We project our own adult issues around healthy eating onto kids. Kids are like blank slates for the most part. I mean, yes, we do have a very small subsection of children that really do have feeding disorders, extreme picky eating, those types of things. But when we're talking about the general population of kids, most of their ideas around food come from what's projected on them from messaging and adults around them. And we put a lot of our messaging around that. They hear dad say, I never ate broccoli as a kid, or, I hate broccoli. As the parents say, how can I get my kid to eat better? I'm like, tell me what you're eating, because that's a huge thing, right? Kids, the modeling is critical. You can't say to your 4-year-old or your 14-year-old, you need to be drinking more water throughout the day when they never see you drinking water during the day.
Yeah.
Right? You can't. So that modeling and that engaging them in the process of that, it's just huge.
1 in 10 adults don't drink any water. It blows my mind.
Absolutely. I'm surprised it's not actually more than 1 in 10, actually.
I believe that was the last I checked. Yeah, that's it. It's insane. Is stevia a Dr. Birkin's approved non-caloric sweetener?
You know what? It is. is, because again, with a few exceptions, I'm not about taking anything away totally. Now, artificial sweeteners like aspartame, sucralose, acetylphane, potassium, those I don't think those have a place in people's diets, particularly not kids, based on the data and what we know about that. But stevia, there's pros and cons to it. Would I much rather a child have, a food that is sweetened with that than high fructose corn syrup? Absolutely, I would. And I don't care whether it's chemically made or grown in the earth or whatever. I think there's these ideas of things that are better or worse, as opposed to things that are definitively good or bad. And so, if we say to families, don't do high fructose corn syrup because that's really terrible, but also don't do any of the artificial sweeteners, and, limit the amount of sugar, we're not leaving, and then if we say also none of the plant-based sweeteners are okay either. We're leaving moms and dads wandering around glassy-eyed in the grocery store, looking at labels going, I can't find anything that fits this criteria. But again, I think that goes back to those kinds of foods sweetened with those things would be ideally part of a diet that includes lots of other things too.
Yeah. So it's not that that stevia would be integrated to the complete and total exclusion of sugar.
No.
But it's just good to have that as an option to just cut down on the overall sugar burden, perhaps.
That's right. And because it's complicated, when families, try to read labels on things, food manufacturers, it's gotten really complicated, right? To figure out, what does it mean natural? What does it mean? It means whatever they want it to mean. And it's confusing and it's hard. And I get it. I have a lot of empathy and understanding of parents who are walking through the grocery store on a busy day, trying to fill their cart with things that are going to be healthy for themselves and for their kids, but also having all of the last 3 blog posts and podcasts and whatever else rattling around in their head and being so confused about, is this good? Is this not good? Oh my gosh, this has, this in it. And then what happens is, we get so overwhelmed, we shut down to the whole thing and go, screw it. I'm going back to just the way, that we were eating and whatever. This is too much. I'm anxious about it. I don't know, none of it is making any sense. And so I just think we have to try to keep it practical and reduce the overwhelm for people.
Yeah. I brought up stevia because you had mentioned Greek yogurt.
Yeah.
But plain, not with a ton of added sugar. And so I thought it would be at least useful to some people in the audience. I buy this like fat-free Greek yogurt, which is a very amazing protein source. It's got like
Absolutely.
80 calories per cup and 18 grams of protein. It's like, where else can you find that? Something with those kinds of macros. And so I buy it plain, but I always keep in my house a variety of different flavored stevia drops. And so I'll just put some of those in the yogurt and mix it up. And it's totally sweet. It feels like a treat, but it's so good for you.
Absolutely.
And then you can also use that. Another cool hack, both for yourself and for your kids. I'll buy unflavored club soda. And you can put those same drops into your unflavored club soda. And suddenly you have like a delicious stevia sweetened soda. Absolutely.
And those are like sparkling water is such a great option. We're talking about hydration, and how many adults are not well hydrated. The data's there for kids too. And we know there have been studies done on academic performance for kids with even mild dehydration, which, let's face it, most kids are walking around at least mildly dehydrated. Even mild levels of dehydration negatively impact their attention, their work completion, and their grades. So that's low-hanging fruit too, of saying, how can we just better hydrate kids? How can we make water interesting? Let's get club soda, sparkling water. Let's look at freezing whatever fruits they like. And kids love to do this too. Get the ice cube molds and let them make their own fruity ice cubes. And they put those in their water bottle, add some stevia drops, to sparkling water, or there's other options out there now that, just have flavors without chemicals and things in it. Look at how you can make this interesting. Get crazy straws. You will not believe the number of kids who are like, I'm not going to drink water. And then I'm like, but pick a straw. And I've got like 6 really cool looking straws. And they're like, that one. And yes, I will drink it. Right? Get them a cool water bottle. Let them have choices. Let them decorate their water bottle. Like, make it interesting, make it kid friendly, and get them hydrated. And the more that we push in things like water, things like produce, things like, a protein shake popsicle, those kinds of things, the less room there is for all the other stuff that we don't want them having. And so that's also why I'm a big proponent of what can we put in? What can we focus on adding as opposed to just this focus on what we're taking away or what you can't have.
I love that. Let's shift gears yet again and talk a little bit about exercise, because we don't have that much time left. But exercise, what is your recommendation for parents out there with kids that are just plugged into their devices? How do you get kids moving more?
Yeah. So exercise can be such a dirty word for so many people. Again, adults have such like ideas about exercise. So I just like to call it movement. Like, we're just going to move our body. Let's focus on movement. And so that's how I talk about it with kids and families. And I have them actually look at how much movement is incorporated in your day. Some kids are getting a lot of movement. They really prefer it. They are the kids who, like, the second school is out, they are outside moving. But if you have a kid who isn't sort of, naturally prone to that, you do need to set some expectations around that. And for me, what I have found works in my own family and for so many families I've worked with is you say, these are the priorities. These are the things that need to be done. And then whatever time is left is device time, right? So we need to get chores done. We need to get 30 minutes of physical activity or movement in. We need to do these things. And once those things are done, use the rest of the time for whatever it is that you want to do. And that can include electronics. I think that's a much better way of going about it, even better than saying things like, you can only have an hour of TV or screen time. That ends up turning into a huge thing for parents to have to micromanage and deal with, which doesn't usually go very well. So I focus in on what are our priorities as a family. What is the most important to us, especially, in the summer months when kids are home, they don't have the structure of school. And there's this tendency for them to maybe just roll out of bed and lie on the couch all day with their face in a screen, but to set up some structure for that and say, here's the things that are important. These are the things that need to get done. And then you use the rest of the time for whatever you want. But physical movement absolutely should be a thing on that list, especially for kids who are struggling. Whether you have a teenager who is struggling with an anxiety disorder or depression, or you have maybe an 8-year-old who's struggling with ADHD or behavioral stuff, they all need movement. Movement, physical activity outperforms just about any medication, any other treatment approach that we use. And we really should be prescribing exercise or movement for kids. But it's amazing the number of teenagers who come into my clinic. No one has ever asked about what they eat or how they eat or if they eat, which is a big issue for some kids. No one's ever asked them about that. No one's ever asked them about their movement habits. Do you get any exercise? No one's ever asked about their sleep. No one's ever asked about any of those things. And they're not getting better, even on prescriptions or even with years of counseling. And they look at me like, why are you asking those things? And when I start to educate them about that, they're like, oh, that makes so much sense. And I've had kids as young as like 10 years old say to me, well, why didn't my doctor tell me that I should, be running or doing exercise every day? And it's like, it's a great point. Why aren't we educating? And I think it's because we have this assumption that people won't want to do that. But that's us making a decision for them. And that's not our role as providers to do. Our role is to make sure that parents, kids, adults have all the information about all the options, and then they get to choose, right? Yeah. But I would not be doing my job if I didn't educate kids and parents about how robust the evidence is behind physical activity and movement and how to work that in their day, helping them actually implement that, because the data is so good that it improves so many things. We should be talking about that.
It's almost like a magic bullet.
Yeah.
How can parents incentivize their children to move more? Because at least for me growing up, I was always terrible at sports. And so I didn't think of I didn't think of myself as like an athlete or anything like that. And so I actually kind of struggled to get, I think, the requisite amount of exercise on a daily basis.
Yeah. I think this goes back to the family system and expectations and modeling. Do they see us as the adults incorporating physical activity into our day. Now, that could be something structured like going to the gym, using the Peloton, whatever. It could be, do they see us going out and taking a real long, good walk with the dog? Do they see us leading an active lifestyle of taking the stairs when that's an option? You know, what do they see us doing? And so when we think about how to incentivize them, that's absolutely the first thing we need to be focused on is our modeling and doing things together. There are kids that I work with who are extremely behaviorally resistive to doing anything that involves physical activity. But there are absolutely ways that we slowly but steadily start to get them comfortable with that. And it's short things to start. And it's always with an adult. You know, help me take the dog out just to the end of the driveway to get the mail and back. Great. You know, we're not going to start out with a 3-mile jog. You know, no kid's going to do that, especially if they're resistive to it. So we're going to do it together. We're going to keep it brief and, you know, work them up to that. And look for variety, even in fun activities, right? It doesn't have to be structured exercise. On the weekend, can we, you know, go take a hike somewhere in the area? Can we go to the beach and play and run around in the sand? Can we pump up the bike tires that have been deflated in the garage all winter? And like, let's just tool around the neighborhood. Let's get the scooters out. Let's go on a scavenger hunt. Doesn't have to be this idea of you need to be doing 45 minutes of, you know, moderate to intense cardiovascular exercise. I mean, certainly while that may be ideal, especially when they get into the teen and adult years, you're going to lose them right from the word go. So how can we just start to incorporate this in ways that feel accessible to them?
I love that. When I was 16, I discovered weightlifting, and that became my go-to exercise modality. Is resistance training something that you would recommend for kids?
Absolutely. It can be great. All 3 of my boys, now I have 3 sons and a daughter, all 3 of my boys have gotten very into weightlifting, and it's been great for them. But you know, where we see that do really good things is not only for the mood and anxiety, but also for kids who struggle with the attention, but kids who also have diagnoses of what we call sensory processing issues, where their brain's just struggling to take in input from the environment. They're getting overwhelmed. And what a lot of those kids really benefit from is something we call heavy work, which is this proprioceptive input to the muscles and the joints that you get from things like carrying a heavy laundry basket or pushing a heavy shopping cart or lifting weights. Provides that really good proprioceptive input that then has a regulatory effect on the brain. So for parents, if you've got a kid who tends towards the real impulsive, hyperactive, dysregulated side of things, even if they're little, and you're not going to be getting them on a weightlifting regimen, you think about that idea of how can we get weight and resistance embedded in activities. Fill 2 milk jugs with water and let them, you know, carry those around. Give them the heavy laundry basket or the box of blocks to push across the floor. That type of resistance and input is so regulating for their brain.
That's amazing. I feel like children with sensory processing issues, that's sort of in my purview because I think I might have a friend or 2 that have kids that have that. That's super interesting and very actionable. I love that.
Yeah. And there's many more. I mean, you know, when we were talking earlier about just how many more kids have issues, sensory processing disorder it's not even an officially recognized diagnosis, but we do know that it exists and that many, many more kids struggle with that now. So that's another one we can put in that basket of just, lots of parents dealing with more and more kids with everything from mild sensory issues like tags on shirts or seams on socks bother them a bit, all the way to kids with very, very severe and profound challenges with auditory input, visual input, touch input. So those are things that fall in this entire realm that we're talking about.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
All the types of foods that you struggled with, or we all struggled with when we had insomnia or we had really bad anxiety. Remember those first few months of the pandemic? Those were like my Triscuit months. That was my anxious food. And so now coming out of it, I think that there's so much that people can do in terms of what we've learned about who we are as eaters, and then what we need to do to improve based on the latest evidence.